Welcome to this episode of the Customer-Centric Retailing Podcast, a forum for retail leaders to discuss industry trends, challenges, and opportunities.
This is Anil.
And this is Fabi, and each episode we invite some of the brightest minds in the industry to discuss the future of customer centricity, with topics ranging from the rise of e-commerce to brick-and-mortar operations, to omni-channel technology to retail culture, and how all of these elements come together to create customer-centric retailing. Today we have with us Gary Newbury, retail supply chain thought leader with over 30 years of experience addressing mission-critical logistical challenges. He has served as an interim executive at organizations such as Gordon Food Service to deliver an innovative, digitized, and agile supply chain. Welcome to the podcast, Gary. Such a pleasure having you on.
Well, it's a great honour to be here to share some of my knowledge and to have a really good conversation today.
Absolutely. I'm really looking forward to getting into that conversation. There are so many topics for us to dive into with you. I know Anil is particularly buzzing to start talking to you and asking you questions because you specialize in retail supply chain, and that's one of his favorite topics to talk about. But before we jump into all of that, I was wondering if you could just give our audience an intro to yourself, kind of what attracted you to the industry to begin with.
Yeah, I've been in retail logistics for at least 30 years, maybe a little bit longer. And I've worked with various clients over a long period of time. I've worked with about 40 plus clients doing 60 transformations, business turnarounds, implementing innovation, digitization, and agility. And I have to go back a long time because we were doing agility a long time ago. There have been some kind of common themes that I've kind of bumped into over time. I've taken a really strong interest, certainly since the late 2000s, where I ran the largest and did a big turnaround there, the largest two-man home delivery operation. That's all. Put that a different way, the largest two-person home delivery operation in the UK, and we were delivering nearly 8,000 deliveries a day into people's homes. So what I don't know about some of the context about last mile isn't really worth writing home about. There's a lot of things that people fall into e-commerce. We need to do it. Let's do it. And there are some kind of big watch outs as companies should go through that process.
Yeah, I think your background is obviously so great in all the experience that you have, obviously your expertise in retail supply chain logistics, last mile delivery, all of those things. And I would say, supply chain is really the area that's dictating, I think, who the winners and losers are in the retail industry today. Shipping is one of those factors that are, I think, the number one factor behind shopping cart abandonment, particularly during the pandemic. And customers have come to expect really fast delivery. They've come to expect it at a really reasonable cost or even at no cost. And a lot of people blame Amazon for that, obviously. But that just puts a lot of pressure on retailers that don't want to diminish their bottom line, but need to keep up with those customer expectations. Otherwise, they're just not going to be in business for too much longer. So I'm curious what your advice is for retailers as they tackle the shipping question in particular, since that really seems to be the thorn in the side of so many retailers right now.
Yeah. There's this weird concept that somehow we can generate a free delivery, and even better, we can do a free return. It's absolutely almost preposterous that you jump into your vehicle, you drive somewhere, it costs you money, and if you imagine it on a much bigger scale, driving a truck somewhere, delivering multiple customer orders, it's going to cost a lot of money. So what retailers seem to have not done very well is actually recognise that, or maybe it's in their financial modelling or just their perceived, they need to do this, they need to follow somehow, that they're not really thinking critically about what's ahead of them. Often retailers go, let's go online, and they find that transition is relatively easy because you can just put your assortment online. That's tick. Oh, let's do some delivery. Oh, let's just phone up the local small package carrier, the FedEx, UPS. Oh, we're there, done. and they sort of dust their hands and they watch the thing. Oh, it's going up by 20%. Last month, it's jumped up another 10%. This is brilliant. And so it's very encouraging when you're hearing these sort of big headline figures that this venture that's going to save your business somehow is performing really well, until the CFO comes running down the corridor and say, it doesn't quite add up, guys. My financial model, well, we probably won't forget CFO would probably say my financial model was seriously flawed, but this isn't adding up, guys. There's a lot of costs on here that we didn't anticipate. And I noticed, I've been on the website myself and it said free delivery. Nothing in this world is free. So what have you done about your pricing strategy? Oh, we have to be lower than we are in store. How is that even possible? So I think that many retailers rushing into this are just about to get into an early bath, especially if they've had a big take up of e-commerce because of their pricing strategy. I don't know. I don't know if you want to sort of add into here.
Yeah, in fact, I really like what you said. Shipping is the one of the main line items on the P&L statement when it comes to e-commerce or any of those delivery thing. And like you said, unless you've done it for a few years, you don't realize it that how much does it cost. It's easy to see those numbers, the revenue numbers grow and get excited about it,
Yeah.
but reality is that after you run your whole P&L statement, now if there's anything left at the bottom line, or is it going negative, right? And I've been talking to like a lot of these retailers, and they are who've been doing these e-commerce for a long time. They have been thinking about it because they have had multiple conversations with CFO, and
Yeah.
so they are talking about how to leverage what they have today to reduce the cost. Like all these retailers who have multiple store locations, and all these different micro fulfillment centers and all that. So there's a lot coming out there to help with it, but still, e-commerce is not simply a way to sell things for cheap and also deliver the item for free. You cannot be thinking in that terms. Otherwise, we are ruining our physical retail business, and at the end, we are killing ourselves. It's like a race to the bottom, basically.
Yes.
In fact, to bring up that, there are a lot of retailers who started doing e-commerce very recently. Of that, many retailers just started shipping from the store and buy online, pick up in store, and all that. I am really, really, thinking and concerned, kind of like, how can companies that used to otherwise take many years could get things done in 6 weeks? Well, it's good. I appreciate them that they took the decision and started doing all these things like buy online, pick up in store, shipping from the store in such a short span of time. That's really, I appreciate it. But it's time. I think they should go and retrospect it, because I'm sure there's a lot to be learned here, and there's a lot of things we can do to optimize, including your systems, your processes, and the way you run these things, and the technologies that is in place. Because in 6 weeks, what you did, a lot of it could be patchwork to
Yeah.
get up and running as fast as possible. But I think they need much better systems now, right?
Yeah. I think you're right that retailers are notorious for doing one great thing, which is rushing at things and hitting it head on and getting it done. Very tactical in their mindset. The difficulty is when we're kind of, how would say, meddling with our go-to-market proposition, we need to go right back to the vision and then work out what that is. How can we articulate that carefully? What does that mean for our go to market proposition? How does in store and online fit together? Should we even be doing online? I know that we're in a pandemic, we're in a lockdown. And if you look at something like Primark, and although I might be critical of the fact they should have some kind of online presence, because people will turn up and buy their stuff, they've decided not to. Look at things like Winners, TJX, I guess, south of the border, and unless I'm slightly out of date, they haven't been able to establish an online presence. So that's a that's a strategic choice they've made, but it may be actually hurting them. Or maybe the strategic choice they've made is, if we do e-commerce, it will hurt us even at a higher rate. So we've just got to, weather this storm. But going right back to that vision and making sure that vision is very well communicated. It's an articulated vision. It's something that guides everybody on how to, say, choose systems, implement systems, change processes. It should be able to articulate and give people a good grounding in how decisions are to be made around here. So when we think about the rush to get online, online, do it from the stores, etc., and there's been an enormous endeavour to make this happen, and 10 out of 10, small round of applause for everybody who's been involved in that. But I think because it's been done in such a rush, the strategic thinking process, the critical thinking that ought to have been done maybe 10, 15 years ago to actually establish an online, and is this part of the proposition, a few more systems. I think maybe they need to go back to the vision and say, do we understand that, what's our purpose in life? How do we understand our customers? Which customers are we going for? What's our go-to-market strategy? What's our pricing strategy, online, offline? And actually differentiate those. And I've been a big subscriber to saying there's only one supply chain in it, and it takes it all the way through to the store, and it comes from a store, and it can either be store replan, it can be click and collect or versions of that, or it can be delivery to the point of convenience, typically a home. So I am actually starting to think there possibly is a world where we do have two propositions to the customer under the one brand. But if you want the convenience of home delivery or picking up on the storefront apron, there's a price for that because it's convenient. You don't have to endure our store and go and do your selection, blah, blah, blah. And maybe you came in to buy a specific thing and it isn't there, so you're forced into another choice. I think that there's a logic that says if you want it on our apron, it's one price. It's in store is this price. This store is for us to pick it on your behalf and have it ready for you for the convenience of that. And if you want it taken to your home, there's another price. And I think Costco, I think, probably one of the only retailers who actually differentiate between in-store price and their delivered price. Here in Canada, we're having it. We can get it home delivered in I think it's 2 hours. So I think that retailers must orientate themselves to say there is convenience. Customers will value convenience, and if they value convenience, then they have to, they will recognise there's a cost of convenience. Convenience is not free.
Yeah, in fact, this is interesting here that with the coming back to the looking at our company's vision and then understanding our customers. And again, there's the important thing is the customers are evolving, the behavior of customer is evolving, and in fact that's why our understanding of our customer behavior is super important,
Yeah.
and we have to keep up. Like today, like you picked up the example of like Primark, who has they decided not to do e-commerce, which is okay. But I think if their customers are mobile enabled, if they have phone, if they are using WhatsApp, if they are using Amazon, they know that there are retailers who publish their catalog online. And with Target and Walmart and all this lot of new age retailers that have updated their systems, now you can actually look up the item, see if the item is in stock in my nearby store. When you are within the store and you are trying to find the item, it will even tell you which aisle, which shelf. So what I'm trying to get to is customers now much more participating in the buying process. Back in the day, it used to be that you tell the retailer and the associate will go get it for you and they'll bill it to you and you take it home, you give them the money. But now customer is actually much more
Yeah.
helping themselves. So the retailers have to enable them, give them the tools so they can go look up the merchandise. They can go learn about it on their own. They should be able to find the item easily. In fact, create their own basket, add item to it, check out on their own, pay on their own, everything, and finally, walk out of the store. So what I'm trying to get to is that yes, you may not want an e-commerce per se, but it doesn't mean that you do not use digital channels. You have to still be capable of interacting with the customer who are
Yeah.
digital savvy, who are actually using mobile phone day in day out almost every. Yeah, thanks to that, Apple now has a report on how much I've been using my phone all day, like, how much of social, how much of shopping, and all that. I know. So, really, with phone, we are using so much. I think there is no excuse for retailers not to have a digital channel. But to your point, it is important that they take a look at all the costs associated with the delivery of the product and bake it into their pricing. They have to be honest and very upfront and clear and transparent to the customers about the pricing. You don't want to cheat them like, hey, it's free. Like you said, there's nothing free in the world, and Costco does a good job of it. If you want to order a mattress, you can pick up in the store a certain thing, but then you want to get it delivered. There's a white glove service, and you get it ordered. They will come in home, install it, and everything. It's not free. If you want free, just go to the store and pick
Yes.
it up from there. So I totally get it that last mile supply chain is tricky, but it's the best way to do it is communicate with your customer. If you are honest and you're transparent, then customer will believe in it you and they'll work with you to get what they want and will pay for the convenience
Yeah,
that they
and
want.
I think this goes back to the competitive positioning of the organisation. There's a number of strategies, and I think many retailers just focus on one, trying to beat the competitor on price, so price leadership. And there are others, and one of them is obviously differential. Uh, and I think that retailers find it very hard to, or either are unskilled at or unknowledgeable of how to differentiate yourself. Because if you can differentiate yourself, you can typically, if you do it right, you can command a price in the marketplace. You'll drive loyalty. However, doing the price thing and doing it for free, for the sake of a couple of extra cents, you may lose a business and you'll never see that customer again because you're dipping into the wrong pool, trying to find any customer at any cost. There's a big implication for that you may not survive this time, and you then add in extra costs to service those customers, like the online channels. You're suddenly on a hide into nowhere. So I think that one of the most important things is to understand that back in the day when we had the four P's of marketing, we had like price, product, promotion, and something else. I always lose one of them. What we need to understand in today's world, that delivery is part of a product. And therefore, if that is true, and I think that increasingly more and more commentators, and I suspect more and more retailers are coming to the conclusion that it's not just the product itself and how we position it, etc. It's actually how we provide it to the customer. There's an add-on cost to that. Therefore, there has to be an add-on cost to. If you want it here, it's one price. If you want it here, it's another price. If you want it in store, it is free delivery. You pick it up yourself.
Yeah, when we talk about cost, I mean, of course, there's no one that's more aware of the cost of shipping than the retailer. And I think a lot of retailers are feeling really stuck between a rock and a hard place right now, particularly with the pandemic, right? Their stores are shut down, all that inventory is locked up, everyone's ordering online, nobody's going in store. And all of a sudden, they have to fulfill all of these orders from warehouses, which are few and far between, and it's costing them a pretty penny to fulfill all of these orders, but they don't have a choice because otherwise they wouldn't have any sales at all. So I'm curious. I think we've touched on store fulfillment a little bit, but I'm curious to get your view, Gary, a little bit deeper into what your view is on store fulfillment, how people should start thinking about it, start implementing it.
I think that the most important thing, and it happened here in Canada on the first lockdown, there was a brand called a banner called Canadian Tire. It was deemed to be an unessential, then it became essential. But just in that short period of time, it was unessential. We had a weird phenomena, and bear in mind it was a dealer network, but putting that aside, for people in Canada will know that, but people wider than that might not appreciate that small nuance. But it was the first time that they had the chance to bring the digital channel and the store channel, which, this is the adult work of adults. We run stores for years, we know what we're doing. Those bright young things in the digital department, we don't understand that. But it was a good way of bringing them together, because the only way they could continue with sales was to integrate the two together. So you had your digital channel, your online services actually being fielded from a store. What they found very quickly, I suspect, was managing online by curbside generated a lot of orders because they swap, I don't know, 80% of their revenue from in-store traffic to curbside. Uh, what they probably would have seen a couple of several phenomena. One is their stock was accurate at last because you didn't have Mrs. Jones putting something in their basket and moving it somewhere else, or it was in the back room or wherever. The stock was actually stable. So they could pick the orders with some degree of more confidence than they normally have because, store stock is always a moving feast, especially if the internal systems of a company aren't updating on a very much a real time situation. So you're putting the wrong data out to the customers. The other thing would be they had the whole store to do the shopping and put the shopping down somewhere. So when we're doing in-store picking, it's very consumptive of both resource to do the shopping on behalf of a customer, and it also requires space. And the reason for this is simple, and I don't think many retailers have really twigged this. If I went onto the Canadian Tire store with my order, I said curbside, please. They should be asking me, when do I want that? When would you like that to be available for you? So most people would say, right now kind of thing. But if they said, well, these are the slots you could have. So I go in and I say 5 o'clock, they could actually defer the picking and the requirement for extra space there because typically they'll be running in a first in, do first, so that I get an order at 4 o'clock in the morning. I turn up at 8 o'clock and I pick that first because I've got no reference point, and I tell the customer it's available. They don't turn up for another 10 hours. But the next customer who came in at 5, they want it now, but I don't know that. But I pick that after that one, so it's available at 8:30. They come straight away. They pick it up and go. So there's something in the way that these for non-grocery, because it's more apparent in non-grocery, that there has to be a better way of stores asking customers when would be the best time for this to be available for you from these slots, rather than just saying just give me your order and I'll tell you when it's ready. That's really unsatisfactory, which means that you're wasting time by picking it early, putting it on the floor, you're clogging up the area in front of you. But the main point was actually bringing the digital and the in-store together. So the store had to, sort of integrate those two things and own it, because if they didn't do this, there'd be no revenue, and everybody, all the loyal store associates will be at home probably watching Netflix on government support, and they may lose those people who knew how this store operated. So it was a way of keeping them working and integrating online and in store together, and also working out what does curbside actually look like when it's scaled rather than.
So Gary, you're saying that we should have, even for the buy online pickup in store or curbside, whatever we want to call it, you think that having a additional information of what is my service level agreement, how soon the order can be ready, and then an appointment information about when the customer might come and to pick up. Those two things, if retailers can start
Yeah,
capturing and then process it properly when it comes to fulfilling the orders, so pick, pack, and shipping of the orders, getting the orders ready. You say that that should help retailers in optimizing their store operation.
if it's a single item, depending if they map out where the store is, the actual where the item is within the store, and if it's a single item, I need a new hose, whatever it might be, there could be a set of parameters which define how quickly that can be picked from a standing start, and therefore these are the windows that are available to that customer. And it could be, we can do it now. We pick it now. If you select, say if it's 8 o'clock in the morning, you select 8 to 8:30. I can pick that, literally put it in a bag, scan it, and hand that straight to the customer. And that's very helpful for one, the customer, and two, for planning your labour requirements.
I wanted to ask you, Gary. Obviously, you've had so much experience working with many retailers and observing their different supply chains. And I'm curious, what are the main problems or challenges that you see time and time again? Are there any trends that kind of really stick out to you?
Yeah, I think in terms of fulfillment in its more wider sense, not just digital channels, but of course that's pretty important. They always seem to kind of congregate around five areas. One is process. They got very clear, definable, consistent processes which always have the same outcome. So very detailed SOPs that tell people exactly what expectations are here, or is it very informal? Systems, having cutting edge systems that actually work and map carefully onto how the operation actually works, rather than sort of have a system that kind of is half defined and then people fill in the gaps on it, which is terrible. So you need SOPs for sure. Architecture. Sometimes when you go into a distribution center or fulfillment center, well, certainly distribution center, you're there. I bet you this was designed like 20 years ago. The business has moved forward. It's probably in completely different categories. Probably needs different types of storage media, like cantilever racking, because they're into long, windy things now rather than necessarily all cube boxes. The culture, definitely. Does everybody is the warehouse and is the transportation actually working as a team, or are they doing this? Is that unit as logistics working closely with merchandising, and they all share the same vision, or are they still doing their kind of silo work? And KPIs are a killer. KPIs can either be very well conceived and or not, and often the not are because we naturally collect lots of information in our systems and our ways of working. We measure lots of things naturally, like how many customer invoices did we send out, how many picks did we do, how many cases did we do. That data is naturally flowing, and therefore, because it's so easy to capture, people define KPIs around that, rather than thinking about, going back to the earlier part of the conversation, what's our vision? What's important around here? What's the expectation? Okay, so we need KPIs in transport, in warehousing, in merchandising, in marketing, whatever it might be, that actually might be difficult to capture from where we start here. But imagine that we did capture that. We found out a way of capturing that, and we could generate that on a daily, weekly basis, whatever, and it actually guided us to the right kind of behaviors, the right kind of outcomes. And I see a lot of KPIs which don't make any sense. They're very convenient because it's tracking natural data, but that natural data is often a matter of history. So questions like, how many cases did you pick? What's your case pick rate today? And it's like, it's 90. Tell me about the complexity that sat underneath that, because it was 92 yesterday, it's now 90, it's dropped. Why? Oh, problems with staff, they're rubbish. Not the mix changed, the line thickness changed, i.e., the amount of pick slots we had to visit. We had issues with the availability of equipment, the availability of staff, whatever. We need to understand that, but the high level statistic, the high level KPI that's sort of feeding things like incentive bonuses and the apparent perception that an operation has within the business are fed from normally naturally occurring data.
So Gary, I have a question for you. You brought up some really interesting points here, and I'm like, I have a bunch of questions going on. So the first one is really that you said that we have these companies that are in a company. We have like these departments that are working in silos. We have transportation, we have warehouse, we have merchandising, and all these things. And they are, because they are working in silos, we have inefficiencies that are part of the system that we are working in. Now, to overcome that problem, like what I see happening is we are producing more than what we need.
Yes.
Like, if because merchandiser knows that they can only place order once, because it takes such a long time that by the time I get my second
Yeah.
shipment, the season will be over, and I would not have anything to sell. So they, based on their experience or gut feeling or whatever, they place order for more items to begin with. So they have items in stock in time, and then they sell it through the season, and then towards the end of the season they liquidate it, or then it goes into outlet stores and all that. So particularly for non-grocery items, like non-essential items, like fashion retailers, what I'm thinking is like really, one of the reasons why retailers should be thinking about transformation at the merchandising, at the supply chain level, I think, is because they want to be way more responsible about the environment, about the earth that we live on. We cannot just simply, because of our mistakes, our inefficiencies, our capability, or our limitations, we cannot simply produce too much and consume those natural resources and take what nature did not. I mean, like, we are buying it from our future generations. Like, we are taking away from future generations. So responsible. Now with this whole COVID situation, pandemic situation, a lot of retailers are learning some hard lessons, which is like, hey, all these inventories that I had, I was not able to sell them on time, and now I'm having all these financial problems, so I'm going through this whole bankruptcy. So one of the things that always comes to my mind is that, will these retailers, when they come back from bankruptcy, will these retailers become more conscious about their action, the impact of their action on environment or on sustainability? Because, like, you don't want to produce too much. Finally, if you produce too much and not sell it, you are going to have a financial problem. But that is something that you only understand. But beyond that, there's a lot more to it, and which is about being responsible, being responsible to the earth. And that's where I think one of the strategies that could come into play is pre-ordering. Why not present customers with the information about what are the new products that you are bringing to the market? Why don't you present that information on your different channels, including digital and your physical stores? Make your customers aware and let them pre-order. It's okay, if our customers are responsible, and they are, like, they are conscious of what they're consuming and about the earth and the environment, then they will actually take some time to learn about what's next, and if they really need it. By doing this, I think what we are doing is, first thing is, we are being responsible. We are reducing the waste on the earth, and the other thing is, we are also being financially responsible, because we are not producing anything that we are not going to sell. Essentially, because when these banks or all these property companies are rescuing all these bankrupt retailers, it's public money, actually, that you are wasting on some bad decisions made by these executives of at these retail companies. So I'm like, I have all
Yeah.
these complex. I know I've said a lot, but there are these complex, and in short, if I had to say, I'm saying, well, hey, executives at these retail places, if not for the business sense, think about the responsibility that you have towards the society. You cannot simply keep going on working in these silos, and because you have power to use the money that company has, just go do whatever you want and hide your
Yeah.
mistakes.
So there's a huge amount to unpack in what you said, because there's kind of like two levels there. There's responding to your point as a retailer. It would be like, we'll tell you that we're green and environmentally friendly, and we're definitely looking into, let's say, like apparel, because I think that's really the center point. But there are other categories that are very similar in nature, but the apparel one is particularly full of waste. And we're working on it, sir, and we're going to get there, and that's our purpose. So you'll have like the leadership teams describing that, and then the people who are kind of bought into those kind of values will go, oh yeah, we'll go for this apparel because they're saying the right thing, and all of a sudden they change their mind because they find out they're not. There are a whole range of techniques that can be done to better make the supply chain much more responsive, but we have to stop the leadership believing there's only one way of doing this, and the only way to make progress is to do more of this. So I when we think about H&M and Zara or Inditex, and to an extent, I think there's no, I'm not going to mention the other ones. They've worked out that the best thing for them to do, taking advantage of global transportation systems, modern manufacturing techniques, is they just buy the material. They work out from listening to customers what is it that they need, and they may have a very efficient social media kind of grabbing, polling information and working that into a demand sensing environment that they say, I think we're going to have this kind of style of things, this kind of cut, this is a new black. And in 2 weeks, they can produce that and ship it around the world and have it in stores in that time. And so, therefore, the waste, and I've seen this in food, and I'll come back to perhaps an example of this. The waste is just a bit of old material, and they could probably use it in the next season. So, in some ways, the whole thing is geared around saving materials, because if you can save materials, the whole thing starts to work. But if you do it like the traditional apparel retailer, they have to book 6 months ahead of a season. They have to guess what it is. They're not really clued into social media to drag that demand information across. We've been doing it for 20 years anyway, so let's just do it again. Let's try and get the style about right. And it comes into the stores, they run it successfully for a few weeks. When they see a tail off, so they discount, they do markdowns. And sometimes they have that actually built into the cost model. In their assortment plan, they will have a provision for markdown. So they plan to do this, and then they get to the end of it and they have to clear it. And then what they can't clear, hopefully they give to charity. So there's some beneficiaries of this, but often it ends up in landfill.
Yeah, yeah. In fact, this was something that again, comes. This thought comes after you talked about is that if we go this route, then the concept of luxury would come back, and it would be people will have certain sense, feeling of that they are what when they get certain item, they get the feeling that that's a luxury to get it, because now it's not mass produced,
Yes.
and because it's not mass produced, and uh, so what happens is like that whole the concept of creating the false scarcity, like how a luxury market works, where they create that sense of scarcity for the
Let's
people.
call it exclusivity.
Yeah, yeah, exclusivity, yeah. So what they need, in fact, if they become more responsible, then automatically they are actually also exclusive, and that's like and the buyers feel privileged when they get the item, and it's okay because now at this point, because they feel luxury, that's a luxury to have it, so they'll be willing to pay a little extra for it also.
Yeah.
So I think with the less volume you can still do good profits because you have some better improved margins, and definitely you are being more responsible.
So yeah, the question is, where does this responsibility or environmental awareness actually go? Because you can bet your bottom dollar, and I'm probably going to upset a number of people with this comment, that typically it's the millennials are very tuned into the environment, and perhaps the Generation Z. But you can bet your bottom dollar on Prime Day they're clicking, 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 picking up all the cheap stuff. Well, not cheap stuff, but the good bargains. So yeah, there's companies portraying, we're very green, we're very environmental, but not really. They could do a lot more hard work. Then there's consumers going, we like, this virtuous concept of, doing the right thing, but they don't. So there's quite a lot of confusion in the market about where do we draw that line between doing the old stuff, which is unproductive, unfriendly to the environment, quite unfriendly in many cases, and people who say, I want environmental friendliness, but at my price. So there has to be some kind of rebalancing of that. Probably the pandemic may help us. It may not, because people may be in such a difficult financial position with rentals that they've had the luxury of having a moratorium of having to pay for having jobs that they haven't got now. The government, in Canada, subsidising their sitting at home. Suddenly, they're in the harsh reality of a very different world, very financially insecure world. Will the need for good environmental care actually rise above their actual financial needs, and will companies trying to respond to what the prevalent purpose-driven buying behaviour is, will they respond to that, or just carry on doing what they're doing because somehow they survived the pandemic and we're just going to do more of it? So there's some really super meta challenges ahead for retailers and consumers. We've been on a journey together. Sometimes the consumers got kind of way out ahead of the retailers, and the retailers are running along trying to catch up with delivering online services where they hadn't done before.
This is such a meaty topic, and I think, like you said, Gary, everyone has the responsibility right now, both the retailers and the consumers, to really put their money where their mouth is and actually start behaving in environmentally responsible ways, as opposed to just saying that they're environmentally responsible, because we all know that that's really easy to do. So I wanted to ask you, before we end, if you can tell our audience what's going on in your world right now, and how they can keep up with you.
I do lots of presentations around the future of retail supply chains, and I'm really glad for this opportunity to talk to your audience. I have very recently kind of almost reverted to interim executiveship or management for other audiences. It's less developed in Canada, so I'm looking to go in and help retailers specifically, but I'm wider than that, with manufacturers, wholesalers, third parties, and people involved in the last mile, to help them to overcome this level of disruption that everybody's facing, and to help them to, get that vision, develop strategies, do some really good flawless execution to make sure that they can succeed during this period and beyond.
Yeah, absolutely. And I really hope that, as things start to progress, and the pandemic slowly kind of starts to go into the rear view mirror, we can all start talking about strategy again as opposed to survival, especially for the retail industry, because it has been such a tough year for this industry in particular. And I'm sure, I look forward to seeing how you shape the future of retail there, and the future of supply chain too. But we did want to thank you so much for joining us, and for a great conversation.
It's been a complete pleasure. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Gary.
That's it for this episode of the Customer Centric Retailing Podcast, featuring our special guest, Gary Newbury. Gary has a long and successful career in the retail supply chain industry, often working as an interim executive to address mission-critical challenges that interfere with retailers' ability to provide an excellent customer experience. After all, especially during this pandemic, delivery makes up a very big part of the overall shopping experience, and retailers need to get it right. If you like what you heard, you can subscribe on Apple Podcast, Spotify, and Google Podcast. Please rate and review, and recommend to a friend or fellow retail fanatic. This podcast is brought to you by Hot Wax Commerce.